opportunity right now to just kind of go over, some really helpful timelines, and just so that you know which schools are, early action, early decision. We want to just kind of go over why the early bird truly catches the worm on the college application. So, Kareem, I'm going to let you take it from here. We're going to use this time and this opportunity to really just give you an idea of planning. So, Kareem, thank you so much. Feel free to introduce yourself, okay? And I am looking forward to our tiny and mighty webinar. Okay, go ahead.
Perfect. So, hey everyone, thank you for taking the time to join. My name is Kareem Stanley. I've been working at Queller Pratt for about 10 years now. Just as it pertains to my background, I'm originally from Queens, New York. I went to Queens High School for the Sciences at York College, the specialized high school in Queens. After that, I graduated from there in 2013. Then I went to Columbia. I did a chemical engineering degree at Columbia, and I graduated in 2017. Then I was working for a few years. So I was working down south in Houston, Texas, predominantly as an engineer for about 3 years. Then now I'm back in school doing my JD and my MBA here at Harvard. So I'm in my second year of the 4-year program. I did law school last year. I'm in business school right now. And the last 2 years of the program, I'll kind of be floating in between both of the schools to finish up requirements. Happy to talk about that. If there's any questions about it, both Columbia and the Harvard JD MBA program, or just JD MBA programs generally. But the topic of today is just going to be staying organized as you do the college application process. So what I want to walk you through is a few quick things. The first of which is just kind of getting your bearings on what all the college application process entails. So we're in New York, or you all are in New York, presumably. And we obviously have the CUNY schools, the CUNY system, the city universities of New York, and we have the SUNY system, state universities of New York. Under the umbrella of CUNY, you have Macaulay Honors College, which is just like the honors university that kind of connects all of the city universities, so the CUNY schools. And then you have the broad range of things. So the common application that you can use to apply to colleges across the country. So there's a lot of moving pieces in New York, and that's why we are setting up this webinar. So as it pertains to kind of CUNY schools, there's going to be a separate application process from the Common App. From Macaulay Honors College, that application is going to be due on November 16th, so it's just around the corner. I'm actually helping a student prepare his application right now. And again, that is a separate application process. It's under the CUNY umbrella, and I can even show you that if Francis, if you think that makes sense. Then there's also like the SUNY system, but the SUNY system, you can apply to SUNY schools under the common application, so it is a little bit nuanced there. So the first thing I want to show you all is, or the first thing I want to tell you all is that the common application opens on August 1st every year, and it closes on January 1st every year. January 1st of the following year, like the first day of the next year. So obviously, kind of like the thing that I always do when it comes to application is I'll open it up initially, like when the application comes out, and I'll fill out all the little material, like to make sure that I don't miss anything, and to make sure like if it becomes a rush at the end, that I have all of the preliminary stuff taken care of. So that includes my name, my family's information, all of those things that don't really change. So I just fill those out up front. So if you all are going through the application process, I would certainly encourage you to go into the Common App, fill out all of those things, get your college list on the Common application, just to kind of get the preliminary stuff out of the way. And then when you start thinking about the substantive material that you have to put into the Common application, it's not like you have to do the substantive stuff and then do the administrative stuff all at the same time. And you run the risk of making a mistake if you're going in a rush on the administrative piece. So it makes the most sense, in my opinion, to kind of go into the Common App early, put all the administrative and the informational type stuff in the Common application. It'll save and just hold it there. So yeah, that's your first piece, is that it opens on August 1st. Go in as early as possible and fill out those materials. and try to add whatever colleges you think that you'll be applying to. Then, when we're thinking about the common application, we have three different kind of application processes. So we have early action, early decision, and regular decision. So early action and early decision are very similar. Typically, the deadline is going to be November 1st, which just passed, or November 15th. And I am actually helping a student doing some November 15th applications. He just finished up his November 1st applications. So either way, they're dependent on the school, and it's usually going to be November 1st, November 15th. Notice how the 15th is very close to the Macaulay Honors one, which is the 16th. So a lot of things can start to pile on. So starting this process as early as possible is imperative and why we have this session set up. So given that background, I just want to walk you all through the early action colleges. So if you literally go on Google and you say early action colleges, it'll give you a comprehensive list of all the schools that offer early action as one of the processes that you can get into school through. So the most common deadlines, again, are November 5th and November 15th. Let me zoom in a bit because I know Francis would like that. And you hear back from these colleges in mid-December. So it's an amazing way of going about doing this. Early decision is what I did when I applied to Columbia. So before Christmas, I knew where I was going to school. And, you know, the entirety of the following year was much more of a breeze. I just had to kind of keep my grades up and and that was pretty much it, because you don't want to let things like your grades fall completely off, because they do pay attention to that. You still have to send them a final transcript, and you can get an admission rescission if you just fail all of your classes. But it was nice to have that safeguard of saying I knew I was going to go to Columbia and things would be fine. So there's a few things that can happen when you apply early action. So you can get accepted, denied, or in the third case, you can get deferred. So colleges do this sometimes when they have, so early action, a higher percentage of students get in, but it also is kind of a tougher applicant pool because it's the pool of students who already have their SATs together and, you know, like they were ready enough to put the application in. So in theory, like it's going to be a little bit tougher to compete with the other students in this position, but still it is worthwhile because, again, like your application chances or your chances of getting in are going to be higher. It still makes a lot of sense to do it. But that said, there's three things that can happen. You can either get accepted, denied, or you can get deferred. And deferred just means you'll go back into the regular decision pool. So when you go through the deferral process, you can submit a letter of intent, or a kind of like a secondary letter that tells them why you want to go to the school and what other things have happened since then. We don't have to talk about that in this conversation but if that does happen to any students, then certainly reach out to us and we can help you through that. But either way, again, three things we have, and you can get accepted outright, which is what happened in my case with Columbia. You can get denied outright, or you can get deferred, which means it'll just put you in the regular decision process. And technically, you don't have to do anything else. We would encourage you to kind of send in a letter stating your interest in the school and why you feel so strongly that the school is good for you. But again, you just don't have to do anything. It just means that your decision will get pushed back to February or March of the following year. So there are a few schools that have restrictive early action, which is essentially early decision, but don't worry about that too much because we'll talk about it in just a bit. And the big thing here is that there is a complete list of all the early action schools, and they divide them up by state, which is kind of amazing. So Alabama, you have a bunch of options here. Give me just 1 second and let me admit one more person from the waiting room. Alabama, you have Arkansas.
Let's take a look. Let's take a look at East Coast, like New York, New Jersey, Florida. Let's go through East Coast just so that parents know the names of all the schools that encourage the early application. And I'm so happy that you guys are listening. I just want to remind you the deadlines for these schools is November 1.
Yeah.
You want to make sure that you are applying, I would say, if you're a smart cookie, by September 1, so that everything is already submitted. But anyway, Kareem, go ahead as you were saying.
Okay, perfect. So I'll touch on California too really quickly, Francis. So you have Stanford that does early action. You have Caltech that does early action. So certainly kind of look into those universities and look into doing an early action application if they are of interest. And then jumping to kind of Florida, for example, you have Tampa, you have Miami, which the people really enjoy their experience with Miami. There's like a big football culture and such. Then you can jump over to, let's say Massachusetts as well, just so you guys understand. So Harvard does have an early action process. MIT also has an early action process. Northeastern, and I'll leave it there. And then Jersey, Princeton, Seton Hall is another common one that we kind of talk about. Rutgers is one that we kind of talk about as well. Or
Do you mind going through New York again? I just want to make sure the parents have it. New York and surrounding areas. Let's start again, just so that parents know which schools are the early action schools. Go ahead.
Yeah. So for New York, I'll actually like go down this entire list. So Adelphi, Bard, College of Mount St. Vincent, College of St. Rose, Columbia GS. So this is a little bit nuanced and a little bit, I'll talk about this very briefly. So School of General Studies is Columbia's school for like, I guess continuing education is kind of the way that it's presented, if I recall correctly. So it's usually for like non-traditional folks. Usually you'll see military or people who took some time off before coming back to school or something like that. So it's not like the regular Columbia College or Columbia's engineering school. So yeah, Columbia has an early decision process. Like the school that I applied to, the engineering school, has an early decision process. So don't get kind of mixed up there. It is early decision, which is binding, and we'll talk about that in just a second. Concordia, Fordham, Hofstra, Iona, Ithaca, Lemoyne, LIM, LIU Brooklyn, LIU Post, Manhattanville College, Marist, Malloy. So there are many in New York. NYT, Niagara University, Pace, Parsons School of Design, Pratt Institute, the Sage Colleges, Siena College, and then you have all of the SUNYs. So common SUNYs that people go to are Binghamton, Albany, Buffalo. New Paltz is kind of common too, and then Polytech is kind of common. Utica, and then Wells College. So as you can see, there are many choices here. I guess the big takeaway is that Columbia, kind of the Ivy League school that we try to help students get into if they want to go there, does not have an early action process. So that is a big takeaway from the session today. And hopefully folks kind of caught the delineation there. Like early action means that you aren't bound to going to the school. You're just getting an early decision from that school or an early response from that school. And you can choose to accept it, you can choose to deny it, but it's just nice to have something in hand that says, middle of December, you can come to the school if you'd like to. Then North Carolina, I guess Chapel Hill, another great school. But let's see. Pennsylvania, I'll just talk. Penn State is one of the schools I helped a student do the application for November 1. I believe he also applied to Scranton and Temple. So yeah, there are a few in Pennsylvania. Notice how like University of Pennsylvania, the Ivy League one, is not on this list. I believe they do early decision. And yeah, so long story short, for the super selective schools, it's not incredibly common for them to have an early action process. So you notice there was Princeton on the list, Harvard was on the list too, but Columbia wasn't. And I don't think Brown is, nor do I think Dartmouth or so on and so forth. There's a bunch of the Ivy League schools that don't do this, but Stanford, MIT, both of them did it as well. So there are certainly like amazing options. It's just each school has their own flavor and you have to watch out for it and be careful, because when you're applying to these schools, you have to understand that if you put in an early decision, you only can put in one early decision application. So early actions, you can put in as many as you'd like to. So you have free range of applying to all the schools here, and you could get acceptances to all of them, and you'd be in a great position, and you just choose one of them, and you wouldn't have any issue. But now early decision adds a little bit of nuance. So early decision, in conjunction with getting an early response from the school, you are bound to that decision. So if you get an acceptance, then you have to go to the school. Like it's kind of like a binding contract. So it's a big commitment. You only can have one application that you do an early decision application to. It's regardless of the financial aid package you get. So commonly people say that your financial aid package won't be as good if you get an early decision application or you get an early decision acceptance. I don't know if that's true. I had great financial aid and I got an early decision acceptance. So, that's one point of reference.
Yeah, and I want to quickly add about myself. I personally was early decision with NYU, and I just want to let you know that I also had an excellent financial aid in the end, because I applied for union scholarships and I got my mom's union and my dad's. So I wound up getting an ED, and then I got 2 union scholarships, which were a huge hit for me. Go ahead.
Yeah. Very cool. So very similar to the early action piece, you can get accepted, denied, or deferred. Again, deferred just means that they're going to put you in the regular decision pool, and you'll just get your decision the same time that everyone else does in February and March. Yeah, so the last piece, one thing about when you are deferred, they said that you can do like a recommendation letter, another recommendation letter, or some mid-year grades, just something that makes your application stronger. That's what I talked a little bit about before. So if something has changed in your process, or if you took the SAT again, if you can get another recommendation from another teacher that thinks highly of you, if you have great grades in the semester, all those things would help to make your application stronger. So you certainly want to send those things in. So I guess one slight nuance here is that some schools offer an early decision 2 thing now, where the deadline is typically in January as opposed to the deadline, which is originally for early decision 1, November 1st or November 15th. So you just want to be mindful of that. It's kind of the same idea in that, you're putting the application in a little bit earlier than other cases, but for all intents and purposes, let's just focus on early decision 1 versus regular decision. So yeah, as you can see, schools with early decision policies: Brown, Cornell, Dartmouth, Duke, Northwestern, UPenn, Colby. And then there's some that offer both an early decision 1, early decision 2. But I would recommend that you go for the early decision 1 if that's at all possible. And then kind of a very similar breakdown of just different schools by state. So as you can see, California, not as many. Harvey Mudd is a great engineering school, but not as many in the way of early decision. But now if we go to Massachusetts, for example, you have Northeastern, you have Boston College, you have Boston University, you have Brandeis, you have Tufts. So all of these are early decision schools, great schools, but understand that you only can put an early decision application into one of them. So you have to be selective about which one you decide to go with. And oftentimes you'll go for like an overreaching as high as you can get, because you're putting your best foot forward in this application. This is, if you get an acceptance to the school, you 100% want to go there. That was the case for me with Columbia, so it kind of worked out in my case. And then, yeah, notice how Dartmouth is on this list in New Hampshire.
Yeah, and I did the same thing, and it was a huge hit that I applied early decision. So I did a survey of all of my friends. Kareem, I totally encourage you to do this. I surveyed a bunch of my friends from NYU. Every single person within my friend circle was an ED to NYU. I thought that was really fascinating. We're still friends like 20 years later, which is wild. So these, social networks, I can't even tell you how beneficial they've been for my personal and my professional career. Very interesting. But I did this survey, and literally every single person was an ED. And NYU also has an ED too. If I can get really technical, because I got to where I need to go right now. If I can get really, really technical, let's say you are not accepted ED1, Kareem will go over that with you. You can be deferred. You either get fully
Mhm.
rejected, you get deferred, or you get waitlisted. Kareem can go through that with you, but then you can apply to other schools. ED2, Colgate University has that, NYU has that. So we can also maybe go through the list of ED2 schools just so that you know that it's very important. Just kind of a rule of thumb that I've liked very much to teach the kids and the parents
Mhm.
is that you have early decision or you have deadline. And what's the prefix in deadline? So hopefully that brings the point home. The prefix is dead. So I hope everyone can read into that as, transparently as possible. Make sure that you don't wait to the last minute for these deadlines. You definitely want to apply September, October, November with the application. It's I think it's really important to know that the application itself is not a fun process. You're writing a number of essays about yourself, your life. Quite a lot of these essays are about your hardships, your family's hardships. It might bring out the worst in your family unit. And I think it's important to recognize that if you are not planning your time well, um, it's just extraordinarily high pressure on a family unit to work in these applications close to the deadlines. Kareem, if you could just go over the ED2 and if you could go over what it means to, what the deferral means, what the wait list means, I think that would be really helpful.
Yeah, perfect. So really quickly, just other schools that are on the list. Notice how I mentioned before, Columbia has an early decision process, but now when you talk about School of General Studies under Columbia, that has an early action process. So there is a delineation there. Most people on this call, I would assume, are going to be applying for the CC, like Columbia College, the school that gives you a Bachelor of Arts, or the engineering school, the school that gives you the BA, like the Bachelor of Science. So just be mindful that if you are applying to either of those schools, it is going to be an early decision, which means that it's a binding process. Notice how Barnard is. Barnard is like the women's college under Columbia's umbrella. Cooper Union, a great engineering school. Cornell. Fordham has for both early decision and early action. NYU, to Francis's point, that she applied through the early decision process, so on and so forth. So yeah, Francis's point earlier, and I guess I'll just also say University of Pennsylvania, one of the other Ivies is here. Brown is here. So a lot of like the top tier schools are going to be an early decision, not an early action process. So just be mindful of that. And give me 1 second here. Okay. So what Francis was mentioning before was kind of that early decision 1 and early decision 2 piece that I was talking about at the very beginning. So some schools offer both early decision 1 and 2 deadlines. So both of these are binding, but the early decision 2 just has a much later deadline, kind of in the January timeframe. So be mindful of that because it's kind of getting towards the window of this to kind of put it into like simpler words. So there's a few overlaps here. So early decision 1 has kind of the earlier timeline and is binding. So earlier timeline meaning November 1, November 15th, and is binding. So if you get accepted, you must go to that school. Early action has that earlier timeline, so November 1 or November 2 or November 15th, but it is not binding. So you get accepted, you don't have to go. Early decision 2 has the later deadline, like the January 1, but it is binding. So the only reason that you would do early decision 2 is you're telling the school, I 100% want to go here, but I just didn't have my application together early enough. So if you accept me, I will come here. And it just kind of increases your chances in that way. So early decision 2 has that later deadline, but it is binding. And then regular decision has that later deadline, the January 1, but it is not binding. So essentially there's two kind of processes for each one of the timelines as a way to break it down and to make it a little bit more digestible, and hopefully that makes sense. And I guess as it pertains to application process and thinking through like the timing associated with all of these things, to for instance's point, it is going to take quite a bit of time to kind of get the essays together. My students often go through a few iterations before they have something that's like concrete enough for me to work with and help them do the editing and think through kind of where they need to flesh out material and what needs updating. So certainly give it at least a few months, if at all possible. And to Francis's point too about the family situation, really kind of like the ugly side of family starts to come out. I have kind of a student that I mentor, not even through Queller Prep, but a student that I mentor who's going through the application process now. And then through that has found out as she's been applying to financial aid that she can't get like her, yeah, this is getting like a little personal, but either way, I won't mention any names, but the long story short is that her parents are separated. She's not really in touch with her dad, and they ask for kind of her dad's information as it pertains to finances. She can't get access to that information, so now that causes a huge problem. So the long story short is that you want to start as early as possible, and you want to catch things like that as early as possible so that you can account for them and figure things out, call schools if you need to, because stuff like that happens when you're going through an application process that requires you to submit more information than you ever had in your life before as a student. So I got a question in the chat, and please do, folks, pose questions if you have any questions, and we can kind of like figure them out together if I don't know the answer off the top of my head. For substantive material that we had for tonight, we're kind of getting toward the end. And I'll just do a quick recap for the folks who joined a little bit later, but please do ask questions if you have any, and we will get them answered. So one question in the chat is, can you apply regular decision to other schools and ED2? So you can apply, regular decision to other schools, and you can apply to ED2, or early decision 2. The issue is that if you get into the early decision 2 school, you have to reject all of the regular decision ones that you may get acceptances to. So it is binding in that way, but it's not like you can't apply anywhere else, if that makes sense. Is that helpful? Okay, perfect. And I'm thinking through what else. Are there any other questions? Please do pose them in the chat if you have any. Oh yeah, you only can do ED2 to one school, but you can apply to other schools through regular decision. Similar to how you can do early action to many schools, but you only can do early decision 1 to one school. Okay, perfect, good. And thinking through what else would be helpful for the evening. Around what time would you hear about a decision for ED2? So it's going to be the same timeline, February, March, if I'm not mistaken. Yeah, by January 1. All right. Yeah, mid-February is usually when you get the decision for an ED2. And regular decision is February, March. It kind of is subject to change. Sometimes it's earlier, sometimes it's later, but kind of the same timeline as the regular decision application. And then thinking through what else would be helpful. So um, the other piece that is kind of helpful and gets people turned around a bit when they're doing this application process is to ask for recommendations as early as possible. Um, Especially if you're going to be doing these early decision, early action kind of deadlines here. I've had students that wanted to do an early action or an early decision type of deal, and it it has caused them a problem because they've reached out to teachers, a week or two beforehand, and asked for a recommendation, and the teacher said that they couldn't get it to them. So we had to kind of work around that and figure out how we were going to piece things together for that. So yeah, the two things that are really time consuming are going to be your essay and your recommendation letters. So certainly think about those things as early as possible. I would recommend, so Francis said to submit the application September 1. I would recommend at least starting on your applications kind of like August timeframe, and then hopefully it takes, a month or two and you can submit by at the latest. I'd say like mid-October is a good place to be for these early decisions. Like aim for mid-October, and then if you have to, end of October is fine. But all that means is that you should ask the teachers from as early on as possible. Like you should be asking teachers for recommendation letters mid-September at the latest. So, because it does take quite a bit of time, and the teachers have so much going on, and they're writing recommendation letters for dozens of kids. It's a rough situation for high school teachers. But another question in the chat is, how can we negotiate financial aid for early decision? So that's one of the things that is the downside of early decision, is that you can't really. You're bound to going to the school, so your response to them could be asking for more financial aid, but it certainly is not what I would call a negotiation, because you don't really have another decision. You're bound to that school, and I mean, yeah, it's kind of putting you in between a rock and a hard place. So that's a reason that a lot of people don't do early decision, because they are fearful of that. But I will say, and Francis said too, that I had a great deal of financial aid and got into Columbia early decision. She had a great deal of financial aid and scholarships. I guess she got third-party scholarships, so it might be a little bit different there. But she went to NYU through early decision as well. So they certainly still do give you financial aid. It's just the negotiation piece, I guess, isn't as available. Perfect. Are there any more questions? I'm not seeing anything in the way of questions just yet. So in terms of formal things oh, okay, there's another one here. What are your tips for writing the essay about why we want to attend a particular college? So this is a good piece. This is great as well. So thank you for asking this, because I didn't talk through this. So when you're applying to the more selective schools, they'll have obviously the common application essay that you'll submit to all of your schools. But then the more selective schools will have this supplement that they ask you to fill out as well. So the common app essay, you certainly shouldn't be writing about any particular school, because it's going to multiple. So your common app essay is like a personal statement. It should be about you and should be reflective, or should be introspective and about kind of what you learned as a result of some experience or some hobby or something. But the long story short is that it should be all about you. When you're talking about a particular college, so like tips for writing the essay about a particular college, that leads me to think that you're talking about supplements. So with your supplements, the biggest piece of advice that I would give you is like, choose something. Like in your supplement, it makes it much easier to write intelligently about something that you've chosen, as opposed to like meandering and saying, I don't really know what I want to do when I go to college. I'm not really sure, because it's harder to make kind of a value proposition for that. If you're saying, I'm not really sure of what I'm going to major in when I go to your school, but it seems really interesting that you have this or that, then there's nothing to kind of sink your teeth into. Whereas if instead you say, I want to go to your school because I want to pursue computer science, and you have this professor that does computer science and this class that I feel like would be helpful, and this person graduated from this school and I want to follow their path, like, and they did computer science as well, then it makes a lot more sense and you can create a story around it. So my recommendation would be to choose something, like choose the major that you're going to pursue, even if you're not 100% sure, because you're not going to be held to it. It's just choose something and then write intelligently about it and kind of go forth with that. Hopefully that is helpful. And to be clear too, one of the students that I'm working with on his college applications, going through his supplements, he is interested in computer science. So he and his dad look through schools that are best for computer science. And obviously there's some high reaching schools that were a little bit tougher. And then he had some that were kind of in his range and he felt like very comfortable. Some that were in his range had supplements. So in those supplements, he would talk about how he's taken a computer science course in high school and he loves it. And this school has this computer science offering and this school has this other computer science offering. And because of these offerings, that's why he wants to go to the school and apply it to his future or something like that. It just choose something and then kind of go with that story and might make the story work for you. I think that is a better direction to go in as opposed to just meandering and saying, I'm not really sure of what I want to do, but I want to do something at your school. So yeah, do your research about that particular thing and connect it back to the school. Hopefully that helps. Perfect. So I'll give it a few more minutes, but I didn't have too much more to go through, so I may wrap this one up a little bit earlier than we normally do. I'll probably wrap it up at 7:45. But if questions continue to roll in, I'm happy to stay for longer. But that is all I had for you all this evening. Thank you for taking the time to join, and we will be back next week. And the topic next week, I will tell you really quickly. I had to go back in my email. The topic next week is, applying for financial aid. So that'll be a good one. We'll talk about the FAFSA, the Pell Grant, TAP, Excelsior, all of these little nuanced programs that require a lot of information, honestly. Yeah, they will really go into depth about your lives. And I figure maybe there's people, I will change the settings so that people can unmute themselves for a bit. So yeah, maybe there's someone that can't really type. So if you'd like to unmute yourself instead and ask the question, then please do that as well. I'll give it just one more minute. Keep the Zoom open. If there are any questions, please feel free to post them. But if not, I will close it at 7:45. And we do appreciate you all joining. Hopefully it was a helpful session. To recap very quickly, you have a bunch of different types of systems or a bunch of school systems in New York. You have CUNY, you have SUNY, and then you have Macaulay that's connected to CUNY. Macaulay's deadline is November 16th. CUNY is kind of the regular decision deadline, but it has a separate application. SUNY is connected to the common application. And some of them have early decision, some of them early action, some of them have regular decision, but there's a lot of moving pieces in New York. The common application covers most of the schools. So it covers your SUNYs, it covers schools across the country. So there's different kind of application pools you can go in. For these early applications, you have November 1st, November 15th as deadlines usually, and those will be early decision 1 or early action. Early decision is binding, early action is not. For regular decision, you have early decision, or like the regular decision deadline, January 1st. You can do early decision 2, which is binding, or you can do regular decision. The value add for doing the early decision in both cases is that you're telling the school that I will 100% go here if you accept me. So in that case, the school kind of feels more inclined to accept you, and they don't feel like they're going to lose you if they do. So that hopefully kind of covers everything for today. If you all have any other questions, feel free to email us. But if not, I will end the session for this evening, and I appreciate you all joining, and you have a great night. And Jonathan, we could just hop right in if you want to go to the other Zoom. But all right, you all have a good night.